Introducing new players to D&D or to any other tabletop role-playing game can be extremely difficult. It can also be a lot of fun if you do it correctly. There are many different ways, of course, to do this correctly, whether it's with a self-contained one-shot or if it's the first session in a long, extending campaign. However, there are many pitfalls and many common issues that people can run into. One of the biggest ones that I see online and that I hear people talking about is the idea of character introductions. The idea of rooting your players and characters quickly into the world that you, the DM, have created. Many people will decry the use of starting in a tavern as cliched, overdone, and boring. But sometimes they will offer no good alternative, no great solution for this apparent overuse of the tavern. So where do I stand? I like tavern introductions. Personally, I think they can be a lot of fun. However, for this last session that I did most recently, introducing one of my very good friends to D&D for the first, technically second time, I decided to take a page out of Dimension 20 and do some slightly different character introductions. So this video, we're going to be talking about what I did and how you can implement these ideas to quickly root your players into your game and to make them feel like they are really exploring this world that you have created. Hey guys, Sebastian here from Sebastian's Cauldron, and like I said, talking about character introductions. I mentioned Dimension 20. This is College Humor's actual play D&D series that they have on YouTube, also on Dropout, which is like their version of Netflix. Cool. It is run by Brennan Lee Mulligan, a fantastic dungeon master, someone who has long roots in D&D, in fantasy, in creating worlds, etc. It's a fantastic series. If you haven't checked it out, I would highly recommend it. There's quite a few series at the moment. The first one that I watched, Fantasy High, is very much a love letter to the old 80s coming-of-age movies, something like Breakfast Club or Ferris Bueller's Day Off, but with your, typical fantasy trappings. I'd highly recommend it. Brennan himself is a fantastic dungeon master. In each of these series, Brennan uses an unusual and somewhat interesting method for introducing each character. The parties that he runs for are usually about 6 people, sometimes more, and it's very important right away to get the players invested in the world that Brennan's created and get them really on board with the characters that they have. So rather than having them sit down in the school cafeteria or in the New York coffee shop or in the standard fantasy tavern, instead Brennan explores each individual party member's backstory just a little bit to help them root themselves in the current situation. From there, our band of heroes are able to be united over the inciting incident for our campaign. This is a fantastic alternative to starting in a tavern. It allows each player to have a bit of role-playing time, a bit of stepping into the shoes of their character for the first time. For many players, they might not have thought about how their character thinks, talks, or even just behaves in general, and this will be the very first time that they are doing so. Make sure you get them to embrace the awkwardness. I had a sort of pep talk with this new player that I introduced, and I told her that you're going to hear me do some very stupid voices. I'm going to sound ridiculous, but you are going to notice that I am not embarrassed or anything because this is what I love doing. And the emphasis is, of course, on being comfortable. If you're wanting to, be very flamboyant, do an accent, do a crazy voice and everything, that's cool. If you are more comfortable giving me the gist of what your character is saying and we go from there, that's also cool. The important thing is that you are comfortable and you start developing these sort of role-playing muscles. I will put a little caveat here that this style of introduction often requires you to do a bit of work before the first session, really workshopping and honing these character introductions, making sure that your players have provided you with a good backstory. Something like a couple of paragraphs is really enough. You don't need like multiple pages of backstory. That can get a little ridiculous. Or you can have an Old Man Henderson situation where your backstory is 400 pages long and you can change out little bits as needed to help, justify random things that your character has. Please don't do that, by the way. I don't have time to read a 400-page backstory. If you're hoping to play with me, no, I'm not going to be doing that. However, it doesn't take much effort. It is pretty easy, in my opinion, to come up with an interesting backstory. This new player did a fantastic job. She came up with something in like 10 minutes, which was lickety-split, amazingly fast, and it was fantastic. So what do you need in order to do this style of character introduction? The first thing you need is you need to know what your inciting incident is going to be. The inciting incident, like with writing, with anything, is the incident that kicks off the main plot of the campaign. Of course, when we're talking about D&D, we know that plots can sometimes be a little fluid, something that you think is going to be extremely important the players might ignore or not see as important, in which case the plot can shift to whatever it is that the players are focusing on. Of course, you can have a main narrative, that's fine, but you don't want to force them into doing it. That can start getting into railroading. I've done a video on that, which you can check out up there. The plot can sometimes not be one set narrative, but instead a central tension. Matt Covels did a fantastic video on this. The central tension for this campaign and for this session, of course, is the war between the city of Fulkar and the dwarven city of Menthia. Everyone that the players will meet is going to fall alongside two sides of the same coin. You're either on the side of Fulkar or the side of Menthia. From there, we have a smaller central tension, which is the Royal Coup that took place. The army decided to get rid of the king by way of execution. They then got rid of the nobles, the aristocracy. They redistributed money to the people. There has been civil unrest for a few months, and so now a lot of the NPCs that the players will meet will fall similarly on two sides of this coin. They're either in favor of the coup or they were against it. Now we get to the inciting incident. I, of course, didn't want to send my characters immediately off to the front lines of battle. D&D isn't fantastic at doing warfare. Many people have tried to model warfare rules, but D&D's not supposed to try and model, large-scale warfare. But I still wanted something to do with the war, and so I came up with a very quick plot for some orcs that were trying to sabotage the city's walls. The city, of course, has sent most of its military force out to the front lines fighting the war, and unfortunately now it is rather weak and undefended. They are relying on the war effort to keep Menthia from, trying to sneak in. However, it seems like someone has been doing it for them. So the inciting incident for my players was to deal with these orcs that had managed to get inside of the city, and they were planning on destroying sections of the wall using magical scrolls. So there we go, that's our inciting incident. We know that we need to get the players to deal with these orcs. We can now work backwards from our, central conflict to our smaller central conflict to the inciting incident, to now thinking about the three players. This is where your players' backstories start coming in handy. You need to mind their backstories, look at what it is that they are doing, what are they hoping to achieve, and start teasing out details and include them in your introductions. So the three players that I had our newest player was playing a Tiefling Rogue. Fantastic. Another one of the players was playing a human battle master, a former noble, and the final one was playing a human powder mage. They each gave me relevant backstory details, which were fantastic, and from there I created these little roleplay introductions that allowed them to really get into the game. I asked them a series of questions to help guide their backstory, guide their responses, so that I could also have important information. These questions included how they felt about the coup, where they were at the time, if they partook in any thieving or any killing or anything like that, and then some more stock standard things such as, do you have any family, any friends, how long have you been in the city for, all sorts of things that, would be important to know. From there, you start developing a list of locations, a cast of characters. I make sure that I get my players to give me at least one name, one acquaintance or friend or something like that. My Tiefling Rogue decided that she had family in the city who had disappeared 3 years prior, and she has been spending her time trying to investigate but coming up with only dead ends. From this, she has taken to petty thievery to get by, and she has begun to play with the idea of potentially becoming an assassin. There is a thieves guild in the city, there's also an assassins guild, so she is not stuck for choice. The introduction that I had for her was overseeing a little thieving job for a sapphire bracelet that she found from a lesser noble who had managed to escape the coup. She had been able to steal in the Royal Coup an emerald necklace, I believe it was, and sell that for quite a bit of money, and she had found in the sort of lesser noble districts of the city, there were still quite a few nobles who had been able to escape and were hiding out away from the rest of the people. So her introduction was getting inside, stealing this bracelet, getting out, dealing with any repercussions for bad distractions or anything. And this sort of introduction allowed her to get an idea of the different things that she could do. This is a really great way to emphasize the basically unlimited amount of choice that you have in this game. She came up with several really great ideas when trying to break into this place, including using a crossbow to shoot a bolt into the door to create an audible distraction that the nobles inside would hear, getting one of them to go out of the room. Fantastic. And then some creative thinking helped her when she was running away from the guards that had spotted her in the street by going through a crowd, and instead of trying to push through and everything, she decided to slow down and ease her way back through, because the guards would be looking for someone running, not for someone walking. After eluding the guards and getting away from the crowds, she returned home. She was able to hide the sapphire bracelet away from prying eyes, and she found one of her friends, Cassia, who had been trying to get her to come out for lunch. So they agreed, they went out. During this time, the Tiefling Rogue, whose name was Isa, great name, had been looking around the crowds trying to see if any guards were able to recognize her and spot her, and unfortunately she found a pair of City Watch members who had been observing her and were talking and pointing at her, sort of not very subtly. There's a bit of tension in the cafe when Isa heard someone clear his throat behind her. She turned around, she found not a City Watch member, but instead a messenger from the Fulcorian military. He handed her a letter, and I should have kept it or like taken a photo of it, but I made a letter. I printed out some sort of like parchment paper and wrote a little message. This was from General Navarra as well, and informed Isa that the military was aware of her previous indiscretions, referring to, you know, the thievery and everything that she had been doing, and asked for her to come and do some work for the military in exchange for silence, and she sort of threatened to kill Cassia as well, just in case the other bit of blackmail wasn't enough. So after Isa's introduction, after the other two, which weren't as long as that first one that I just described, they all met in the office of General Navarre, where this orc plot was revealed, and the actual session, the narrative, the combat and everything started getting underway. Doing this style of introduction means there is no question of, oh, so how do we know each other? Or, you know, that sort of initial awkwardness of, you know, meeting in a tavern for the first time. This is because whilst the player characters do not know each other, the players have been able to see them acting by themselves, acting as they normally would, see them interact with other people, and they have some vague idea, some common thread that holds them together. The fact that they are, you know, basically being forced to work for the military. Well, the powder mage isn't technically, he has to babysit the other two, which already creates some really interesting dynamics between the three party members. This style of introduction works really well with roleplay heavy campaigns. If your games are more focused on combat and everything, which mine sometimes can be, then perhaps these introductions aren't for you, but I reckon it's something worth giving a shot. It's always worth trying new things, of course. I personally think these style of introductions are something that I am going to do probably for every campaign in the future. I think it was a lot of fun. It really roots the players into the world. It gives you really great backstories to work from, and it's a really great way to get the players to feel like they are a part of the world. So that is my spiel on character introductions. Let me know what you think. Is this a style of introduction you think you would like to use? Is it not? If so, leave a comment down below. Love reading the comments, my favorite thing to do. You can also do all sorts of other stuff if you want to hear a little bit more about this world that I've been developing for this new sort of campaign. You can check out my one-shot video up there where I talk about it a little more in detail. It's basically just like, you know, industrial age France, London sort of thing with, you know, your D&D races and magic. It's a lot of fun. There's firearms, awesome. I've also done a series on firearms and fantasy, which you can check out up there as well. And if not, there'll be some cards. If not, there's some cards that will appear on the screen in just a second. You can click on those to watch other things. You can do the usual YouTube stuff, share it around, and I'll see you guys some other time.